Thanks for joining me here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast and the Helicast family, alongside Hangar Z, the Helicopter Podcast, and Vertical MRO Podcast. I love being part of this family, and I appreciate you guys for listening on. Now, thanks to our sponsors for this episode, SpectroLab, a Boeing company, 50 years of high-intensity lighting solutions. Check them out today at spectrolab.com. Axness, their mission, wireless intercom. Check them out today at axness.com. And Precision Aviation Group. Get off the ground with tip-to-tail solutions. Check them out today at precisionaviationgroup.com. Now, coming up next, we've got a recovery diver, an author, and what he has to say between his book and here on the podcast. Please welcome our next guest, Mr. Kurt Newport. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real Rescue Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Real Rescue Podcast. I've got a very unique guest with us. And I say unique because this is a little bit different than what we normally talk about. Here it's all about rescues, search and rescue, going out, finding people in distress, and getting them out of that harm's way. But today, we're going to talk to a guy, that's right, Mr. Kurt Newport. What's up, Mr. Kurt? How are you, sir?
Doing fine, thank you.
You're very welcome. And Kurt, you are a deep ocean search and recovery type guy. So when the incident or accident happens and everybody's done their due diligence to rescue and get anybody out of distress, you come in to do the salvage, search and recovery for the salvage. That's awesome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, I legitimately don't get this side of the story much past the actual event. And the only other person I've ever had on this podcast was a Dylan and Jacoby. Jacoby is his cadaver dog, and they go out and they do the searching for the cadaver dog. And I know that's totally different. I mean, you're going deep ocean stuff to go recover stuff that's been underwater or lost, and you guys do this big search until you find whatever you're looking for, deep underwater. So, man, I'm excited to hear about this. But before we get into that,
cadaver dog. No cadaver dogs down there.
I hope not. Gosh, that's not the only thing you're searching for.
Yeah, not unless they were on the airplane.
Right, totally. Well, I'll tell you what, Kurt, if you don't mind, give us a little background. Like you, who is Kurt? Where are you from? How did you get into diving and then deep water diving, the recovery side?
Well, I came from a military family. My father was an Army aviator, and when I was really young, we lived at the Presidio in California, when my father used to fly out of Crissy Field. And
What?
from there, yeah.
That's amazing.
I used to live at the Presidio. I was born in Oakland, California, and from there we just went on postings, all over the United States and all over the world. My dad flew helicopters and light Army aircraft.
That's awesome.
Bunch of different bases in the U.S. Lived in France, Coleman Barracks in Germany, Atlanta Army Depot, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, St. Louis, Missouri. I don't know, too many places. It was tough being an Army kid.
Yeah. Military brat. I get it. Can I say that? I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that, but
yeah, you can. And from there,
good.
When my dad finished his first tour in Vietnam, in Nam in the mid '60s, he was part of the Army concept team. They were testing new weapons, and he would go out and evaluate how well they worked. And when he got back from his first tour in Vietnam, he got assigned to the Pentagon, working for the Assistant Secretary of the Army. And I ended up in Vienna, Virginia, going to James Madison High School. And when I got out of high school, I did a bunch of different, kind of dead-end jobs. When I was 19, I got interested in motor racing, and I went to England and learned how to race Lotus Formula Fords. And
Oh, yeah. Oh, actually, that's the picture you sent me. Oh, you driving that car?
yeah, it could be.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's like a. It
Uh,
looks like I want to say a jelly bean, but it's not. But it looks like a little bean. Like it's got the rounder nose. The wheels are on the outside.
yeah, it's an open
Is that
wheel
the
car.
one?
It's a Formula car.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
that was
god.
probably the Zinc Formula V. That was a good car. Um,
Oh dang.
and
That's
then
awesome.
yeah, I was doing a bunch of BS jobs, driving a delivery van, working on the loading dock at the head company at Tyson's Corner Shopping Center. And I saw this ad in the Washington Post for a company called Ocean Systems looking for diving systems technicians. And I had always had an interest in underwater stuff, submarines and everything. And I went down and got the job and started out building ship fenders for $3.50 an hour. And we were right across the street from Redskin Park in Chantilly. And eventually I graduated to building deep saturation diving systems. Moved to Houston for a while, working for them down there doing that. And wasn't making much money. I said, well, the only way to make any money in this business is become a diver. So I took a leave of absence from Motion Systems, went out to Wilmington, California, attended the Commercial Diving Center, Air Mixed Gas, graduated from there, second in my class. And then as soon as I did that, my old employer, Ocean Systems, had just we're starting an ROV team, remotely operated vehicles, and they asked me to come back and work with that, which I did, and did oil field work for a while. Later on, did submarine telephone cable work for. I think I was working for Ocean Search or Eastport International then, and we had contracts with AT&T, Telego, and we'd go out and maintain submarine telephone cables. And then for there, eventually, I ended up in working on this one Navy contract, the Worldwide Search and Recovery contract, and started doing deep ocean search and salvage operations. And so, all total, from beginning to end, I guess I did about 47 years or close to 50 in the profession.
Dang. That's awesome. Okay, so one of the things I like to ask everybody is like your very first rescue, but for you because it's a little different. So I'm gonna ask two questions. Do you remember the very first time you did your open water dive?
Uh, yeah, I think it was at a lake in Texas. I was living in Houston at the time and went in the lake in Texas, and it was at night, and yeah, it wasn't any big deal really. So,
No big
no,
deal.
I know.
At night in Texas. Right. Okay.
Well,
You can't see
actually,
anything in Texas. What are you talking about?
yeah, I
You
was
get
in a lake.
underwater there at night.
Yeah, I had like a middle ear squeeze. I didn't, I had a cold or something. I didn't clear my ears properly. So, for about 2 weeks, my inner ear on my right side of my head felt like it was filled with fluid, which it was, of course. So I learned that it was really important to clear your sinuses properly.
Right on. Learning from dive number one. All right. So now
Yeah.
with all your experience and everything you got into, do you remember your very first salvage? The search and recover of a salvage.
Uh, well, when we started using RVs, we would always recover things and stuff like that. But the first major salvage operation I worked on was after Air India Air India Flight 182 was lost off the coast of Ireland in 1985. I think it was June 23rd, and that was in about 6,200 feet of water. And
Holy
the way
smoke. That's deep.
eh,
Wow.
yeah, it's kind
Meh.
of deep.
Listen to you. Meh. 6,200 feet? Oh my gosh.
Um, but the way I got into that was I was hired to do about 10 days worth of work on a Canadian Coast Guard ship called the John Cabot, and we had on board an underwater vehicle called Scarab 2, and we were working off of Providence, Rhode Island, doing cable work. And right when we got done with that job, this 747 went down, and they were mostly Canadian citizens of Indian descent. And I was on a Canadian Coast Guard ship, and next thing I knew, we were steaming across the Atlantic because the Canadian government said, "Hey, we need you to help out with this." So we went across the Atlantic. Took about 9 days and ended up in Cork, Ireland. and we provisioned, got a longer umbilical for our vehicle from another ship, the Leon Thevenin, which was a French cable ship. And then we went out to the site, and the plan we had at the time was we would see the plane was going from west to east, and we started on the west side of the debris field. The debris field had already been mapped using a towed side scan sonar, so we knew kind of roughly where everything was, but nobody had dove on it. And the big deal was to get the flight data recorder and the voice cockpit recorder. So we started on the western side of the debris field and just did search patterns, working our way east, picking up, because they really wanted to find the first parts of wreckage that came off the airplane, because sometimes those are very valuable. So we just down there driving these patterns with the vehicle, and it's regular offshore job. We're doing 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, and after a while, you start to pick up suitcases, little bits of wreckage and stuff like that, and then eventually we got into the main debris field where there are jet engines, fan jet engines, chunks of fuselage, chunks of the tail, and the biggest piece of wreckage we saw down there was the center section of the airplane, just in front of and behind the wings, and it was on its side with the left wing sticking straight up through the water column about, I don't know, 60 or 70 feet. And the right
Wow.
wing was folded over on the other side of the fuselage. And I could put the vehicle right inside the open end of the aircraft, and it looked like, to describe it, looked like someone had disconnected everything inside, like all the seats, and just shook it. It was just pile of seats, passengers, wiring, whatever, just junk. And
Oh my
so,
gosh.
so I left home. I left on the job on June 9th. I was only supposed to go on for 10 days. I didn't get home till November 18th. Eventually, I got burned out. I got sick, and decided that it was time for me to go home.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that was my first job.
Oh
I mean,
my gosh.
my first salvage job. I had done a job in Taiwan before that with the Scorpio vehicle, and done a little bit of oil field work in the Gulf of Mexico, but that was for my first big salvage operation.
Holy smoke.
Yeah, it was a
That's
big
wild.
story in Europe, because
Yeah.
they wanted to find out why it came down, and it turned out that Sikh terrorists put a bomb on the plane and
What?
brought it brought it down.
Oh my gosh.
In fact, at that they were trying to bring down two Air India 747s in one day. Um, there was a bot. What happened was there was a plane, a 747, an Air India plane that was taken off from Narita, and the flight was delayed, and the bomb went off in the luggage container and killed a couple of people. So otherwise, that one would have gone down too. So they're trying to knock two 747s out of the sky in the same day. That was their
Wow.
plan anyway. And what kills me, they eventually got caught, and as far as I know, I think they were released by the Canadian government on a legal technicality. So nobody really even paid the price for it.
Oh my gosh.
Yep,
Dang.
that's our legal system.
Wow. Wow. I didn't see that one coming. So wow. Um, let me with this story, this in particular incident that you had, this was the beginning of really what inspired you to write your book too, which I didn't even touch on. You wrote a book called Ready to Dive, and it's got this
Right.
and a bunch of other stories that are in it. Like you got deep into detail with some of the stuff that you got in your book. Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, really, what I talk about in the book is, it's a fair amount of stuff about my background, how I grew up, and everything else. But mostly, what I talk about are all the various operations I worked on, from say starting in the late 1970s all the way up into the 2000s, like 2015, stuff like that. And
Dang.
because a lot of these operations have been written about, but they were never written about by somebody who was there. So I wrote about it from the perspective of somebody who was there on the job, doing the work, and giving all the little backstories and incidents that happened that you don't see anywhere
Gosh.
else.
That's why I love doing this podcast because I love hearing that first person perspective. The dude that was there, or gal, but yeah, the person that was there on scene. My gosh. All right, so let me come back to this. The flight that you talk about on the recovery side, because I don't know much about it, but do you go in and have to disassemble parts of the aircraft in order to recover the black box and the voice recorder stuff, or do you guys take an entire part of the fuselage up to the deck of the ship?
On on this particular job, the Scarab One vehicle operated by Cable and Wireless had already gotten the voice cockpit recorder and the flight data recorder before we got there.
Okay,
So our job was to go out and try to find evidence of what caused the plane to come down. Uh, for the most part, we didn't really take apart parts of the airplane, and there were limitations to the size of wreckage we would recover. But we would go down, map the debris field, inspect the wreckage, and if and we had guys on board from the NTSB and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and they would look at the wreckage, and if it looked like it had evidence of what happened, like say if you had a piece of fuselage skin that had holes in it, that had the characteristics of a high-speed object going through them, like part of a bomb, then they would say, well, okay, we want that piece of wreckage. So what we would do is we had these special recovery tongs, and we would take them down and actually use them to puncture part of the wreckage. And then I would fly the vehicle down. We would attach a long Kevlar lift line to the rigging, and then it would come up, deploy the lift line. And the problem with the cabin was we didn't really have enough room to put much wreckage. So we had a second ship out there, a German ship called the Kurz Turnham, I think it was. They had a bunch of heavy lifter on there and a big winch and stuff. So we would bring up the line, buoy it off, move out of the way, and then they would come along, grab the line, and then pull up the piece of wreckage. And our job on that particular job, we weren't supposed to try and recover any crash victims. It was just we would have been there forever. The main thing was they wanted to find out what happened to the airplane. Only, as far as I know, only one body was recovered. They brought up a piece of fuselage, and there was a guy strapped in one of his seats with no head, and that was the only
oh,
body they recovered. And
wow.
so, it's pretty grueling after a while, especially, when it got later in the year in the North Atlantic, as winter sets in and it's pretty miserable working conditions. It's cold, the weather gets bad. And, but, we got it
The
done.
waves
I
get
mean, I was
big.
young. Yeah, I was young back then. I was only in my early 30s, so it wasn't too bad.
Handle it. You can handle it. Shake it off. Stretch it out.
Well, plus we would put that vehicle down for a long time, and we did dives. Some of our dives lasted like 5 days. We just put the thing on the bottom and keep it down there, and we just change out shifts.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and we would rotate out in the control van. We had a control van, where we operated the vehicle from. There were three stations. We had one on the left, which was the sonar operator, the one in the middle, which is the pilot, and the one on the right, who was usually on standby or keeping the logbook. And so we would do different positions for like a couple hours. Like I'd start off driving, and then I'd do the sonar, and then I'd do the log. And the guy who was doing the log would have to go back to the stern every hour and check on the generators, because we had two generators back in the stern of the ship running all of our equipment. And they were working so hard in the dark. You'd go back there and open it up to check the oil. Their friggin' exhaust manifolds were glowing red hot. I mean, just cherry red.
Wow.
Uh, Yeah, and you had to be careful because all the lights were out on the ship. You had to walk around on deck with a flashlight because, they had to keep most of the lights off once the vehicle was launched, because the guys on the bridge need to be able to see, and they can't do that if there's all these lights on.
Yeah.
But it was an okay job. It was a Canadian ship, which meant it was a wet ship, so I'd get off shift. I could have a beer or something like that. Then I'd go crash about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was on the night shift, and I crash about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, get up at 11, take a shower, and then I'd be back on shift at noon, and we did that every day.
My goodness.
So yeah,
So
it's
man,
it's it's very it's hard physical work. I mean,
we're gonna divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
SpectroLab. SpectroLab, a pioneer and world-leading supplier of high-intensity searchlights for all para-public operations. Visit www.spectrolab.com to learn more about our third generation Night Sun series, high-intensity searchlight. When reliability and performance is critical to your mission, count on SpectroLab Night Sun searchlights.
For sure. You've got me intrigued with the whole vehicle. So there's 2 or 3 people in the vehicle that go down to depth.
No, not in the vehicle. It's a remote
Oh,
vehicle. They're on
got
deck
okay.
and an operations van operating the vehicle.
Okay, got it. So the vehicle and your cameras are down there, and you're moving around with the cameras, and then the tongs and
Yeah,
or the
this
levers
this
and whatnot.
vehicle had
Okay,
2 hydroponics cameras mounted on pan and tilts, which means they could tilt and move all over the place. I think we might have had a third camera mounted on top forward bumper and had 2 ISE manipulators, hydraulic manipulators, and that was how we attached lines to the wreckage. And it had
wow.
4 axial thrusters, which were electric. That's 4 thrusters on the stern and 2 vertical thrusters and 2 lateral thrusters, one up on the bow and one back more in the center of the vehicle. It was actually kind of a difficult vehicle to drive because it didn't have a lot of the auto functions that newer vehicles have. And to fly it, you had to kind of do a lot of stuff all at one time, but you got used to it after a while, and I got pretty good at it.
Nice. Wow. That's wild. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. Uh, I'm sorry you had to deal and see with some of the stuff that you had to see. That actually reminds me a lot of what we have to see in search and rescue, because not everything comes out all good on the back end. So again, you're seeing it days later, weeks later. That's tough. So
Well,
dang, man.
it happens, and usually the way you deal with that mentally is it's just, black humor. I mean, you get used to it after a while, but and it's a lot easier to separate yourself from carnage that's underwater because you're not underwater. You're not down there like in scuba gear recovering a body. You're on a remote vehicle,
Yeah.
so there's distance between you.
Yeah.
And even when we did the same thing on military plane crashes, uh, we never had to deal with the stuff on deck. Generally speaking, they would have a corpsman to do that. We would go down, recover the passenger, pilot, whatever, and sometimes we would put it into these wreckage baskets and we'd haul them up. And then it would be the corpsman and the deck personnel that would process the remains and put them in body bags, that sort of stuff. We did a lot of that on TW-8800. I mean, we recovered a lot of bodies.
Well, I'll tell you what. You know what? I want to hear a couple more of these stories, and I know you have a list, but I'll take as many as you want to share, Kurt. So
Well,
hit me.
I spent some time on Challenger and TWA Flight 800 on Challenger, which was in 1986 January. Again, I was working as a consultant. I went down and worked on a ship called the Stena Workhorse, and our job on that ship was to recover fragments of the right-hand booster, as that was what they suspected had failed and caused the shuttle to break up. So we had this big ship, 250-ton cranes in the stern, and it was difficult to operate in that area because we were right in the middle of a Gulf Stream, and so we had a pretty powerful vehicle called the Gemini, and it had a submerged launching system where you put it underwater and the vehicle would detach and the cable would come out, and then that way you could get the vehicle down below the highest current and get it to the work site and then do what you needed to do. Um,
Huh.
so NASA would have an idea of where these targets were. We go down and find them, and then once we were down there, we were on the contact. They would lower down a Kevlar recovery line with a big chunk of anchor chain on it as a depressor weight. And I would fly the vehicle up at midwater to the line. It was all figurated and taped together, pull off the end and strip it off and fly back to the wreckage. And then we would attach the line to the wreckage, kind of clear the area, and then they would pull the wreckage up to the surface. And when it got to the surface, they would attach a couple of tag lines to it and drag it on the deck. And so, some of these pieces of wreckage were fairly heavy, several thousand pounds. The We recovered the aft skirt of the right-hand booster, and I think that was 14,000 pounds. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, we kept trying to recover it, and what I ended up having to do was literally fly the vehicle as far as I could get it into the open end of the booster and throw like this big piece of chain through, and then we took that out, connected the ends back together, and brought it up. But a big problem was a lot. Most of this wreckage had rocket pellets still on it, several inches lining the inside of the wreckage, and it was a big fire hazard. Um, the Air Force told us, originally they were saying, hey, when you pull this stuff out of the water, it might just spontaneously ignite. Fortunately, that didn't happen, but we ended up with all this wreckage on the deck, and all we could do was cover it with tarps and try to stay away from it. But the Air Force told us that, this uh, uh, type of propellant burns at a very high temperature, over 6,000 degrees. And if one of those things ignited, it'd literally burn a hole through the ship and just sink the ship.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
yeah, when we were first out there, we were all smoking on deck and stuff. And after a while, they convinced us we shouldn't do that. Uh, but, but
Yeah,
we'd get all
please don't
loaded
do
up.
that. I don't want to. I don't want to burn a hole through the ship and sink it.
Yeah, that would be bad. Uh, so we get
Oh,
the ship all loaded up with wreckage, and then when we were done, we go into the Trident submarine base, and there they'd have NASA personnel in their little white jumpsuits and hard hats, and they take the wreckage off and take it back to, I guess, Cape Canaveral. And from what I understand, all the wreckage we recovered, it eventually ended up in a missile silo or something like that, because
wow.
NASA doesn't. They like to hide things, just like, all the records were recovered, they just put it and bury it. It's like, hopefully it just all goes away. Yeah, and that
Huh.
worked until Columbia.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, um, but because we were working in the Gulf Stream, we couldn't always dive. I mean, sometimes the current was just too strong. We had a current meter they would load down and lower into the water, and we would see what the current was. And if it was over 2.5 or 3 knots, we just wouldn't even bother launching the vehicle because we wouldn't be able to do anything. But we were able to handle the current for the most part, and the weather. The Stena was a pretty good sized ship. Um, so I got done with work on the Stena Workhorse, and then went on another ship called the Indy, and we worked in shallow water, picking up parts of the orbiter and external tank. We were using a vehicle called the ASD 620. And that was pretty easy work. It was a much better ship. It was smaller, but had really good food. And then I was on that ship for a few weeks, and then they wanted me to stay longer, but I was tired and I went home. So, we got the job done. I think we recovered about 30 tons of wreckage from the shuttle in all total.
30 tons. Wow. Man, good for you guys. That's wild. When you guys do your search pattern, is it like a standard, like a ladder search? Is it do you do like an expanding square? Does that sound normal to you? Something similar to that.
No, we don't do them like divers do. I mean, if you're talking about like a towed ping or locator search or a side scan sonar search, they do what's called it's just called mowing the lawn. You have a search area. You'll do a pass here, make a turn, come back and do another pass, make a turn, come back. So it's just,
Yep.
I guess it is like a ladder pattern.
Yep.
And when we're setting those patterns up, um, one of the things we have to do is make sure that the lines are spaced properly so that we have sufficient overlap with the sonar so we get full coverage. And then sometimes we'll actually go in and do what are called fill-in lines, which look under the nadir of the sonar, so that because when they have a side scan sonar that passes directly over something, they don't really show up very well because the data is really compressed. So sometimes we'll do fill-in lines directly under the sonar search pattern to make sure we didn't miss anything. And even in some
Wow.
cases, they can do right angle lines. They'll do lines this way and they'll do lines this way, but that, it gets expensive after a while.
So literally, you
Um,
could do lines vertical and horizontal.
well, I say like east and west and north and south. You
Oh,
can do
understood.
patterns
Okay.
this way, yeah, and patterns that way if you
Yeah,
really
yeah.
want a detailed coverage. Um, And we also do searches, with the ROVs, because we have scanning sonars on the vehicle. But typically, to search a significant area, we would use a towed side scan sonar or an AUV that is fitted with a side scan sonar and maybe a multi beam.
No
So
way.
a downward looking sonar.
Wow.
Yeah, but all this
That's
was see
wild.
I was on the recovery ship. All the search stuff was done by other ships. I think it was the Liberty Star and the Freedom Star and maybe some NOAA ships. And we even had other assets out there. We had a couple of manned submersibles from the Harbor Branch Foundation called the Johnson Sea Lynx, and they were manned systems, and they were a big help to us because it was easier for them to work in high current areas because they didn't have an umbilical going up to the surface. So in some cases, if they would go down and attach rigging to pieces of wreckage, and then when that was done, we would come in with the ROV and connect lift lines up and then haul it to the surface.
Wild. Wild. This is blowing my mind right now because like I said, I don't deal with any of this stuff. So I don't ever hear this side of it. Dang.
Okay. Uh,
So
well, well, we can talk about TWA Flight 800.
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, let's see. I worked on 3 different ships on that job. The first one I was on was called the USS Grasp, and we had a small remotely operated vehicle on it called the MR-1. It was owned by the Navy, and our job on that ship was our priority. I mean, part of our priority was to recover deceased passengers, unlike Air India Flight 182. Um, so I would fly the vehicle out, and we were basically had the ship in a 4-point moor over this one big pile of debris. It was probably about, I don't know, 10 feet high off the mud line and maybe 75 feet in diameter. Just a big pile of wreckage. And in there was passengers, seats, wreckage, wiring, lots of cabling, stuff like that. And so I would fly the vehicle out, and when I found human remains, HR, I'd sit there, notify the bridge, and they would send down a diver. In some cases, it would be a scuba diver, or in other cases, it would be a Navy diver in lightweight diving gear. And he would follow our umbilical down, um, take the person and put it into a body bag, or bring them back to the diving stage, put them in a bag, uh, and then actually I think they would double bag them. They would put them in a bag, bring them up to the surface. I know, that's right. Put them in a body bag, bring them up to surface in a diving stage, cut a hole in the bag with a knife to drain out all the fluid, and then put another bag around them. And then we would put them on the fantail to be picked up by the Suffolk County Police. So we just did that like over and over again. And I don't, I don't know if you ever, let me tell you, airplane crashes is not a good way to go. That's all I can say. Uh, and a lot of these
I
passengers,
imagine so.
yeah, all their clothing was gone from wind blast, from being ejected from the aircraft and stuff like that. There was one thing I remember. One time I had the vehicle out, and I was out pretty far, maybe, I don't know, 75, 100 meters, and I found a passenger, and there wasn't much left of him. There was clothing, yeah, and skeletal remains, some tissue, and he had this yellow belt. So I called him the guy with the yellow belt. And so I'm out there, and I'm and I'm sitting right where he is, and I go back to the captain. And I said, "Look, I found this guy out there. You're going to put some divers down. Let's go get him." He says, "Ah, it's too rough." I went, "Oh, okay, it's too rough." So so I just marked the area, and about that time, a bad nor'easter came through, and we had to pull out of the moor, and we went into Staten Island, and it was a nice break. They put us up in the World Trade Center Marriott, and we got a couple of days off until the weather cleared. And then when we went back to the area, I mean, the topography on the bottom was totally different because the water was shallow enough that, the big storm surge, it really churned everything up. And we got back in our location, and moored over the wreckage pile, and I went back out to where I thought this guy was, and he was just gone, nothing there. I'm pretty sure I was in the right area. It's like he was just blown to atoms, just nothing left. So that was the end of
No
that.
kidding.
And
Wow, man.
I mean, it was depressing because we covered this teenage girl once, and I was on deck with the FBI, and we're going through her wallet, looking at her credit cards and stuff. And I'm like, I bet she didn't think she was going to be here today. It's a sad thing. And we would eventually, when we got enough passengers on the fantail, Suffolk County Police would come out and pick them up and take them back to shore. Um, there was one time in particular, the crew decided, well, we're going to have a cookout. So they have this cookout on the bow, and they got hot dogs and burgers and stuff like that. And so I'm up there in the bow, I'm eating my food and chips and everything else. And while I'm doing all that, we got like a dozen people on this fantail dead. And I just thought it was a weird thing. Like, here I am up in the bow, everything's great, happy, happy. And we got all these people back there who just got killed in a plane crash. Uh, so, yeah, it was a weird juxtaposition, I guess you could say.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I can't remember how long I was on the Grasp, but I eventually ended up on the Grapple, which had a larger vehicle on it called Deep Drone, sort of a mid-sized vehicle. And it was a much nicer atmosphere. The captain was a guy named Bill Robinson. He was a really good guy. I got along with him well. And I was in charge of the operation. The crew was on there. They were very seasoned, and it was an easy job. And what we would do is there was a fuel scavenger pump that I think was inside the center fuel tank, and we were trying to find it. And we never did find it, but we kept looking for it. And anything we anything we found of significance, we would pick it up and put it into a big wreckage basket. And then when the basket got full, we would pull it up. Um, and I sort of had a unwritten agreement with the captain. I said, look, if we use this vehicle with this type of technology to find everything, I said, we're going to be here forever. We need to put some boundaries on what we're going to spend the time recovering. So we basically said, anything bigger than a bread basket, we recover. Anything smaller than that, we'll leave that for the scallopers. And so what the Navy did was, once they got done clearing the area with the ROV, they brought in these scallopers, which had these special trawling gear that would dig into the bottom and get down below the mud line. And that's how they would get all of the really small stuff, is just basically scraping through the bottom and pulling it up. These were all these fishing boats. Fortunately, I didn't have to be a part of that, because it sounded like it really sucked being on these fishing boats. But there was one funny thing that happened. They had FBI agents on these boats, and I heard about this story from a friend of mine. And one time they were pulling up what they had recovered on the bottom, and they found a set of fins. And the agent got all excited. He said, "Oh my God, we just found the fins to a surface-to-air missile." Um, and he's getting ready to call the beach and call his boss, and then someone said, "No, no, 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 no. Those are the fins from a side scan sonar, probably a Klein sonar. So I wouldn't go calling the boss." So he got that wrong. Uh,
Oops.
yeah, oops. Yeah, it's not like the FBI ever makes any mistakes, is it?
I don't think I can comment on that.
Yeah,
Let me
don't. There'll
rephrase
be a
that. I don't think I should comment on that.
Yeah, you can comment on it. Just there'll be a SWAT team at your door.
Yeah, right? No doubt. Dang,
So
Kurt.
what's next?
Wherever you want to take us. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft. As a fully integrated system, or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station, the PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
You because you've recovered, you mentioned a couple military aircrafts that you've had to pull out. And I know the cover of your book is like I don't remember the name or that airplane specifically, but
It's a C-2A Greyhound that was lost in the Philippine Sea. Somehow they managed to have a dual engine failure, and the pilot did a really good job of setting it in the water. Everybody got out except for 3 people. And I got involved in that job. I mean, I wasn't even supposed to be on it. I did the pinger search for it, trying to detect the acoustic beacon that was on the aircraft, and it was really deep. It was like 18,500 feet.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so I'm sitting at home and I get a call from my boss. They said, "Well, we need to send you out on this job in Japan." Because the guy that was there, well, he wanted to go home for the holidays. This is over Christmas and New Year's, and I'm like, I had plans too, but so I got stuck going on this job, and so I flew over to Okinawa. It's like a 4-day transit to the site, so it just 4 days just to get there to the site, and they had a pretty good location. And the problem was that we had a towed pinger locator. The tow cable was damaged. I didn't really know how much it was damaged, but some of the strands had broken. This is what I had been told by the guy that was there when he debriefed me. Um, so anyway, so we go out there, we do 4 days, and the problem he had was he couldn't get the towfish deep enough because typically we would tow these things about 1,300 meters off the bottom, and I don't know what he was doing wrong. Maybe the ship was going too fast. He couldn't get it down deep enough. So what I did when we got there on the location, I said, okay, we're not even gonna drive the ship. We're just gonna stop the ship, put it on DP. We're just gonna lower this thing straight down, right where we want to be, and see how close we can get to the bottom. And I got it close enough, and then I had the ship move to the east at like less than a knot. I mean, really slow. And on DP ship, you can do that. You can't do that in a lot of ships. And they just, I started out doing. We dunked the towfish here, pull it up a little bit, move a little bit, dunk it here, move it more, dunk it down, just to get it down deep enough. And eventually, I asked the bridge. I said, "Well, can you just keep moving along really slow?" And he said, "Oh yeah, no problem." So he did that, and we started hearing the pinger. And so I sat there and recorded the data on a spectrum analyzer program. And once we got through the area, we did a turn and we're headed up to the north because we were going to come down and do a north to south run. But as we were making our way to the northwest, our cable broke and we lost the towfish. So it was just an old cable. And so there not being anything else to do there, we hauled in the rest of the cable and headed back to Okinawa. And that was that. But we did detect the pinger, and so we had at least a location in the east-west in a in longitude of where this thing was. And then later on, they brought in the RV Petrol with their Remus 6000 AUV and did a better uh, map, made a better map of the area and determined where the pieces of the airplane. This plane was basically intact. I mean, it weighed about 40,000 pounds,
Wow.
and the picture on the front of the book is of that airplane being lifted out of the water. They had to have a special lift line made just to recover that one airplane, a special 2-inch diameter Kevlar lift line. Because all of ours, the biggest ones we had were about 1.5 inches, and that wasn't strong enough. Um, so anyway, that's kind of that story.
Wow. With some of the military like aircrafts that you're talking about going in the water, and I know there's a handful that happen. Have you been involved with quite a few of those in trying to find like a fuselage?
Oh yeah, a lot. I mean, that and torpedoes. We've done.
Torpedoes as
Let's see.
well? What?
Oh yeah, yeah. Mark
Oh,
48 heavyweights and Mark 38 lightweights, the ones they drop from the helicopters. Um, Let me think. Yeah, a lot of we done F-16s. Did an F-15 off Flambeau Head in the North Sea. Uh, we did a job off San Diego where a C-130 and a Cobra helicopter collided in midair. Um,
I know that story
what was it?
actually.
Oh,
So
you do?
but
Okay,
yeah, it was a Marine Corps helicopter. Um, yeah,
that's right.
a lot. Yeah, I do know that story.
Yeah, and
And
what it
one
was,
one of the part. Well, sorry, one of the reasons I know that story is because one of my friends who I have flown with, her name is Karen Kendall Guerin, and Kendall, she was one of the responding helicopters from the U.S. Coast Guard that went out to do the search for that.
okay.
So that's how I know
Well,
that.
we were out there on I think it was a TATF fleet tug, and we had the deep drone vehicle. And in most cases, in these types of incidents, we do what we if they want us to, we do what we can to try to recover the remains of the flight crew so that they can be given back to their families. But in the case of the C-130, I mean, the plane's down there, the wings are laying over the top of the aircraft, and there's just no way we can get in there to get the flight crew. So we just said, well, here it is. I can't remember. I think we searched for the pilot of the helicopter because that was in the area, but we couldn't find him or something.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so we're down there and we did a survey of the wreckage, and we're like, it's obvious what happened. They ran into each other, so it's not going to be any big investigation otherwise to figure out why they did that. But we surveyed the wreckage. There was no way to get in there and get any of the crew out. So we figure, okay, we're done. We go back on deck, we start breaking down our gear, disconnecting cables, and we get about halfway back to North Island, and he said, "Oh, stop! One of the wives of one of the guys who was lost is making a big stink with an admiral, so we might have to go back out." And I said, "Well, there's nothing we can do unless you want to come in here and bring a big heavy lift system and all this other stuff, and that's the only way you're going to be able to do it because we'd have to lift the wings off the fuselage and somehow get the fuselage open, and it's just we couldn't do it with what the stuff we had." And
Yeah.
so we were kind of in limbo for a while, and eventually they said, "Now you guys are done. Just come on back." And we came back to North Island and demobilized. Um, we would do a lot of these dipping sonars too. Um, God, I can't remember what it's called. It's a special dipping sonar that they lower down from the helicopters.
Okay.
I can't remember the acronym. It's made by Raytheon and it's probably really expensive. They put in the water, and it has all these little elements that come out from it. And when they lose those, they always like to get those back, because it's technically a sensitive instrument. So we've done those off of San Diego, other different places. We did this one off of Norfolk, and helicopter. A lot of times they usually have pretty good positions for these things because they're generally hovering when they're lowering them down. But it's a very small object. It's not that big, and so it's not always easy to find them. But so we do this. We mobilize this job out of Little Creek, and it just pissed rain the whole time. It was really miserable, and we damaged our crane, our launch recovery system when we were putting it together, so we had to get that repaired. Cost a lot of money just to mobilize. So then finally we get done and we go out there, and I had this. We had a female Navy rep from Soup Salvage, supervisor of salvage and diving on board. Really nice lady, and so I started messing with her a little bit. I'm sitting in front of the console, and I said, "I don't know if I can remember what all these buttons do." And she gave me this weird look, and I'm like, "No, I'm just kidding." And so, we get out to the site, and it's at about 4,500 feet of water. It's not shallow. And so I'm driving the vehicle. I think I'd come on. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and so we put the vehicle on the bottom. And we start looking around with a scanning sonar and get this small target and go out there, bang, there it is. I mean, from the time I left the service to the time we found the thing, it was like 45 minutes. I mean, it
Oh,
was like
nice.
really quick. And then by then it was time for me to get off and go get lunch. So then they did the recovery. They just picked the thing up in the arms of the vehicle and brought it up. And what was funny is after the job, the Navy was like, what are you talking about? We spent $100,000 mobilizing all this gear on the ship, and the job lasts 45 minutes. I mean, are you kidding me? So, I mean, they should have been happy, but I guess they were not happy they
Yeah.
had to spend all that money to mobilize all that gear. But we got it done, found the thing, brought it back, and everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
so
all right. So
let me
you,
see.
you mentioned torpedoes. so is it
Yeah,
torpedoes? First of all, wait a minute before I ask this. Like, go into too much with this. Is any of this sensitive information? Because I don't want to get anybody else
no,
in trouble either. Okay, cool. So,
no, uh,
was it torpedoes that drop out of the aircrafts or out of subs or both? Or
both.
and
Yeah,
it's
the Mark.
are
I
they
think
ones that they don't explode? They don't do
no, they're
what
just
they're
they're
supposed to?
just no, they're just test weapons.
Oh,
They do a
oh,
lot of them
okay,
down at.
cool.
They do a lot of them down in. It's called the Tongue of the Ocean. God, what's the name? I can't remember the name of the facility. It's down in the Bahamas. Uh, I don't remember. Anyway, it's down on the tongue of the ocean. They do a lot of test firings because they got a big acoustic range down there with all these hydrophones where they listen to the weapons go through the water and see how much noise they're making and stuff like that. And the problem with these things, they always say, "Oh, we know right where it is." I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, sure." And so we go out there. I mean, you would think they would, because they got all these hydrophones and they're triangulating. And when you go down there and dive in an area, and these are all wire guided torpedoes, and so we go down there and we start looking at it. And he said, "Yeah, we know right where it is because it's right by this one buoy, this array." So when you go down there and you're on the bottom with the vehicle, I mean, there's just miles of this wire from the torpedoes all over the place. I mean, just it's really a cool wire. It's like copper and it's very rigid and it's kind of, it's like unspools from the back of the torpedo. Just miles of this stuff down there. So you gotta be really careful we don't suck that junk into our thrusters. So anyway, you go to the hydrophone array, look around. Of course, there's nothing there. And so then we eventually drove out a way, did a search pattern. I think we found it about 1.2 kilometers from where they said it was. We found it, and we have special recovery tools that we attach to the torpedo. They're torpedo tools, and they're different sizes for different types of torpedoes. So we attach, they're hydraulic, and they just kind of clamp around the body of the torpedo. I mean, the torpedoes aren't always necessarily in one piece. Sometimes they're broken up. They'll have the warhead guidance section, propulsion section, but sometimes they're intact. And so we just would clamp this thing around it, and we would recover them under the vehicle. And the way that would work was, and we did a lot of these off San Diego. We'd have the torpedo dangling underneath the RV on a line. We would have put the recovery tool on the weapon, and it had a line that went around the side of the vehicle, and then we would break that away, and then we'd have the torpedo dangling from under the sub and the vehicle, and then we'd just pull it up to the surface. And when we would get close to the surface, we had a second line, which was like a pennant line, and we would get the vehicle up a wash, and someone would go out there with I think they would use like a boat hook, snag the pennant line, and they would take another recovery line, hook it up to that. Then we put the vehicle back down underwater, pull tension on the main recovery line, and when everything started sort of bouncing around, when the line was tight, we'd flip a switch, hydraulic release would open up, and the torpedo would swing back around, and they'd pull it up onto the fantail. So that's kind of how we did that
Wow.
stuff. That's
Wild.
just basic rigging. Um, and I remember once, I remember, yeah. See, these things don't never have warheads, but they use this stuff in it to run it. It's called auto fuel, and it's really nasty chemicals. So every time a weapon like that was recovered, they always had somebody to make the torpedo safe. In other words, to get rid of this fuel because it's very caustic. It probably causes all kinds of nasty diseases. So there was always somebody from technical support to process the torpedoes or the weapons once they were recovered.
Huh.
Um, I don't know. That's all I can think
Interesting.
of about that.
How often do you
Uh,
get called out on different jobs?
well, I don't get. Well, I'm retired now, so I don't go out at all. But it depends. You can have really quiet years, or you can have a big spat of crashes. I mean, it's just it's hit and miss. Uh, but every time something goes, and they don't necessarily go out to recover stuff, even if there's been a crash. I mean,
Yeah.
um, if they feel like they already know what happened, then they don't want to spend the money to go out and look for it because it's expensive to do this sort of thing, and it takes time for the Navy to line up the funding because if it's not a naval asset, let's say it's Army or Marines, then they got to come up with the money to give to the Navy to go out and do this, and there'll generally be a mishap board somewhere where they try to figure out what happened after the fact. Um, Let me see what else. Uh, these modern aircraft, they're primarily made of carbon fiber. They have hard points on the fuselage where the engine attaches and where the landing gear attach. But I got to tell you, when these things hit the water, I mean, hit them hard.
Yeah.
A lot of times, there's just nothing left. I mean, we did a job. I think it was an F-18, piloted by a guy in the National National Guard or something like that. He was a Delta Airlines pilot, and I don't know how he did it, but he had to water at like 600 knots. And what
Holy
happens is when
smoke.
you yeah when you hit that fast, the plane just disintegrates, and all these little pieces of carbon fiber, they just drift away in the current, and you go down there and you'll find like the engine and broken into like three pieces, and there'll be parts of the landing gear with little pieces of carbon fiber sticking, but the airplane is, I mean, it's gone. So is the pilot. There's nothing left of them. You don't nothing. They're just obliterated. And I've seen that happen several times off Gulf of Mexico, off of Eglin, and off of Norfolk. High speed crash. I mean, those things just break into little tiny pieces, and
And you're
not
the
much to
guy getting
recover.
called. No.
Yeah,
Jeez.
we get to call out and we go out and do the job. I mean, when sometimes when people used to ask me what I did for a living. Like, I used to like to say this, especially to women. I would say, well, they say, what do you do for a living? I go, well, imagine you're on a jetliner, you're going across the ocean, and something happens and you disappear. I said, well, I'm the guy that gets a phone call. That's what I would tell
It's pretty
them. I'm the
accurate.
guy that gets a, yeah, I'm the guy that gets a phone call to go out there and find you and figure out what happened, or maybe bring you home. Um, so
Wow.
I don't know. You must
Dang,
have some
Kurt.
good questions or something.
Well, it's like you said. I mean, I'm intrigued by all of this. I don't know anything about it, so just listening to you
Oh,
right now and listening to what you go through is incredible to me. Um, what does your off time look like? Is it like so? If you go out for a job and you're there for well, you said anywhere between 45 minutes and whatever the months, do you get a lot of downtime off on the back end of that, so you get a time to like decompress and relax?
you mean in the field or back at the shop?
No, back at the shop. Like when you're done,
Uh,
when you're out of the field and you come back, are you go back in an office to work on the machines and
yeah,
on the yeah?
yeah. People come back, and uh, depending upon where the mission was, there usually takes a while to get the equipment back. When they get the gear back, all the any guys who's like newbies, they're the ones that get the pressure wash the equipment and get all the salt water off it. It was a crappy job, but all the new guys get the crappy jobs, just like any other profession. And then generally there'll be a maintenance list, and bring the equipment in, fix whatever's broken, replace stuff if they need to be replaced. Um, but you can sometimes, I could get like a few days off or something like that, vacation time or time off without leave, just because you get burned out from the travel and everything. Like
Yeah.
after that really deep job off Okinawa, um, where did I end up? Oh, I ended up in Naha in Okinawa, and I flew out the next day. And at that time, we had a travel agent, or the lady that did the travel for us. She just wasn't really good at her job. Didn't really care about us. It took me 4 airplanes to get home from Okinawa, like over 40 hours of travel. I mean, it
Oh my
really sucked.
gosh.
And that's the kind of stuff yeah, when you could do it in like 2 airplanes, it took
Yeah.
4, just because it's like, I don't care. It's not them in the airplane, it's us. We got to get on
Right.
these airplanes and fly over the place. I mean, we did. Remember the Priz 3 submarine, the Russian submarine that was stuck off of Kamchatka?
I
Remember
don't.
that job?
No. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Precision Aviation Group. Mission critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip to tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory, globally 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Okay. Well, Russians had this. I think itself was some kind of a rescue vehicle called Priz 3, and this thing gets stuck on the bottom of the ocean off of Kamchatka. Russia. And see when the God, what was the name of that big submarine that they lost? I don't remember. They'd had a major submarine loss, and they didn't bring anybody in because they didn't want them to be in their waters, and there were guys that were left alive, and everybody died because of the Russians because they were so secretive about it. Well, they didn't want to have a repeat of that. So when this thing went down, it's like we want everybody come and help. So like really short notice, matter of hours, I had to go get my passport, come back, get on they had a C-17 at Andrews Air Force Base, got all of our equipment on the aircraft, and we left, to fly to Kamchatka. And so we flew, let me think, we flew from Andrews to, I think it was Eglin Air Force Base. Is that in Alaska? And we had to sit there and wait because the instrument approach at Vlasov didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work. So we had to wait for good weather to go over there. So we're sitting there at Ellendorf in Alaska, just hours and hours and hours, sitting around doing nothing. There's nothing to do. And finally, we get going, and so we flew into Vlasov, and so we're there. All the Russians come on. They all got their uniforms. I got to tell you, man, the Russian military women are like really good looking. At least this one was. And so we're on.
Duly
So
noted.
we're on the. So we're on the airplane, and a lot of times when we go out on these jobs, we have we called the flyaway bar. We would have it was really boring, being on an airplane for hours and hours and hours. You're sitting in the seat. I used to always go back to the ramp in the stern of the aircraft and wrap myself up in a sleeping bag and try and get some rest, but it was too cold back there. So we had this flyaway bar, and sometimes we go on there and party a little bit, and then just to have something to do on the way there. So we get there, we get to Vlasov, and they cleared us. Said, okay, you can start offloading your gear. And so we get our equipment like halfway offloaded. They said, oh, we don't need you anymore. The Royal Navy has found them. And we go, okay. So Royal Navy had gotten there first, and they had already located the Priz 3 submarine. So we get our gear halfway off, and it's like, yeah, you can go home now. I'm like, oh Christ, we just spent 2.5 days on this friggin' airplane now for nothing. And so I get off, and I'm wearing the same work clothes, and I'm really stinky, and so I just sat there, and I really literally on the side of the runway just stripped down, changed my clothes, and they gave us some MREs to eat, had those, and they said, well, they let us go into the airport terminal. That was as much as I saw of Russia, of Kamchatka, or Vlasov. And so I go to the terminal, look around, we get back on the airplane, and then we flew to Kadena. I think it was in Japan. Spent some time there overnight, and then flew from Kadena back to Elmendorf back to Andrews Air Force Base. And so literally I'd spent almost a week on this dumb airplane, done nothing, and that was the job. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was funny. This is off topic, but it connected to that job. I did I worked on the Liberty Well 7 recovery back in '99, and right after I got back from that job, I did a autograph signing or a space autograph show up in I think it was New Jersey. And one of the people that was there was Valentina Tereskova, who was the first female in space. She was a cosmonaut, and so they're having this little social thing before it. And I happened to mention that I just got back from Russia, working on this Priz thing. And I called the place Velasavo, and they go, no, it's Vlasavo. And I went, oh, okay. So I got introduced to Valentina Tereskova, hero of the Soviet Union, whatever you want to call it. So, so we do this autograph show. I said, well, I think I'm going to give her a copy of my book. So I was selling my book, Lost Spacecraft. So I go over, I signed it to her, wrote something in there about it, gave it to her, and she got up and grabbed me and gave me this big kiss on my cheek, right here. I mean, real smoocher. And I think she liked me, and it's like, man, I just got hit on by the first woman in space. That was really cool.
Congratulations,
She was a
dude.
yes, I mean, for her age, she was a good-looking woman. I mean, she was a parachutist when she was younger. That's one of the reasons she was selected to fly into space. Uh, anyway, that's my Russian
Wow.
cosmonaut story.
I like it.
Oh,
I like it a lot.
yeah.
Kurt, I'm loving this. I am absolutely loving this. If you got a couple more stories you're willing to share out of the book, I don't want to ruin the book for anybody, but I'll take them because I'm having a good
Oh,
time with you
there's
right now.
there's so many in there that there'll be plenty. Uh,
Okay, okay.
I did one of the things I always wanted to do was pilot a manned submersible, like a two-man sub. So in 1978, when I was working at Ocean Systems, there was a company called General Oceanographics, and they held a piloting school for submersible pilots. So I went out to San Diego and was taught how to operate a manned submersible. It was a small two-man job called Necton Beta. And once I was through with that, they were doing a job in the Gulf of Mexico, a pipeline inspection with a similar sub called Necton Alpha. And so I go out on the ship. I think it was called the Antares, and uh, I had never been uh, pilot in command on one of these subs before. I was always driving with somebody more experienced in the observation section or being an observer. So our job was to inspect this pipeline. So they have this a buoy line on the pipeline going to a surface float. So it wasn't any big deal. I went out there by myself. I had a commercial diver doing the inspection on the front, uh, looking at the viewports. And so I followed a lift line down to the bottom, located the pipeline, no worries. And I'm just driving down this pipeline in this sub. And it was about pretty shallow, about 400 feet of water. And back then, this was before they had navigational satellites or GPS. So the way they would mark the route for a pipeline was they had these survey boats that would come out and they would have these mini ranger systems, which were pretty accurate. And they would drop these floats. They would have like a piece of railroad tie with a piece of poly line on it going up to a float, and they would drop these things over the side, and that would mark the route for the lay bars to come along and lay the pipeline. And but when the pipeline was on the bottom and they were all done, well, the survey boats would come along and they would just pull the buoy out of the water, cut the line, and leave the line in the water and just take the buoys back. Well, that was all well and good, but the problem is, when you're down there trying to inspect the pipeline, you got all these buoy lines coming off because poly line floats, so they're going to be
Right.
floating up through the water column. And so I'm going along the pipeline, and can't remember what happened. I think I accidentally uncaged my gyro or something. I wasn't sure what direction. I got lost, stirred up some sediment, and next thing I knew, I had this friggin' piece of poly line in a prop. And so I used the Gertrude. It's an underwater telephone. Called up to the ships. Hey, I got this line in my prop, but I'll see if I can get it out. Everything's okay. And so I keep going a little more, and then somehow I managed to get another line on the sub. And this line was going around the conning tower. I'm like, okay, this is seriously screwed up. I got two lines in a boat now, and these damn these railroad tie weights. I mean, they're heavy. So it's like, well, I don't know, these things gonna hold me on the bottom or what? So eventually I called them up and I said, look, I'm aborting the dive. I got these lines in the sub, and so that's what I did. And the thing is, the guy in the front of the sub, I was like, he's never been in a man submersible before, didn't know what was going on. I didn't sit there and tell him too much because I didn't want him to get afraid or excited or something. But I was getting nervous, and it was really hot in the sub because we were down in the Gulf of Mexico. I took off my T-shirt, I'm wiping down the viewports so I can see what's going on. Um, and there's ways to drop off the propeller and all that stuff, and there's a emergency release weight, but I didn't want to do all that stuff, because then you got to replace those things. Um,
Yeah.
so I cracked open the valves and they start coming up off the bottom, and uh, fortunately the line around the conning tower and the compass mast that managed to come off, and I reversed the propeller on the stern, and that unwound the other line. So we managed to get out okay. But the thing is, if we're down there, and if we had gotten stuck down there, we only have so much life support, and I think they had a diving, submersible decompression chamber, SDC, a diving bell on the Antares. Yeah, they could have blown that down and helped us out, but they would have had to find us, and it's like, it could have very easily gone bad. But
Yeah.
fortunately, everything worked out, and here I am.
And here you are.
When I was 18 or 19 years old, I started getting really interested in Grand Prix racing or Formula One racing. And at one point, I said, well, I want to see if I can learn how to be a racing driver. And they had this school in England called the Jim Russell Racing Driver School. So I managed to save up my money. My parents helped me out, and I went to this school. And so I'm driving these Lotus 51C Formula Fords. It's got a Ford Cortina engine in it, radial tires. Didn't even have racing tires. And the thing didn't even have seat belts. I mean, they didn't put seat belts in the car because it made it too difficult for the students to get in and out. So, they teach us all the basics. And so I'm going around the track and we're doing times, but, I was just going too slow. And I need to go faster. But the thing is, I got to tell you, I was scared because, get on the straight of this thing, put the throttle all the way open. I mean, that car was fast. I mean, I was driving an Austin 69 Sprite at the time, but this thing was way faster than that. And I didn't have enough balls to keep the throttle open all the way down the straight because I'm nervous. But eventually I said, look, if I'm going to go fast, I got to start doing that. So I did. I'm going around the track and taking the corners a little faster. And when I'm going down the straights, I'm keeping that throttle wide open, maybe braking a little bit later. And I'm going faster. And but as I was coming right before the pit straight, there was a chicane where it went left and then right, and it went past the pits. That's to slow the car down. If you go to the pit center, and so I'm going in the chicane. I'm going faster than I've ever entered it before, and I turn the wheel, and it's like the wheels just turn, the car's just going straight. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And I was understeering straight off the track, and like I said, these weren't racing tires; they were radial tires. And if I had known more about everything, what I should have done is back off the throttle and just work the wheels back and forth from straight to the left to get some adhesion back. But I didn't know how to do that. I didn't think of it. And so I just understeered straight off the track, hit this embankment, just rode over the top of it. One of the wheels ripped off, went over my head, and, really messed up the car. And I literally thought the steering had failed. I mean, that's how quickly it became unglued and I lost control. And I didn't have any, no seat belts, and I kind of bounced around in the car a little bit, but I was okay. So I think with the amount of money I paid for the school and what it cost them to repair the car, they probably made out about even. But I eventually got pretty good at that. I came home, worked to save my money, and bought a couple of Formula Vs. I raced those both in regional and national races. I held a lap record at Virginia International Raceway for many years, and
for
came
you.
close to I came close to setting a lap record during a national race at Summit. I was half a second into the lap record, but some other guy went about 1/10 of a second faster, and came in second in the national race. That was a very hard fought battle. So I did, yeah, but racing's expensive, and
Right.
eventually I just didn't have the money to afford to keep doing it. I guess that's what sponsors are supposed to be for. But it was a lot of fun. I met some nice people, and so that was it. I did that for about 5 or 6 years.
Kurt, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to getting your book and reading through it. I'm psyched. I'm totally psyched. So ready to dive. I'd like to ask you one more question before I let you go. It's something I'd like to ask all my guests. It's just parting words of wisdom. So if you had a piece of advice that you would pass based on everything you've done with your underwater diving and search and recovery, what would it be?
To someone who is trying to do what? Get into the profession or something?
A little bit of everything. Yeah. People that are in the profession or that are going to get into the profession.
To trying to get into that line of work, best that they don't. But you don't really make a
That
ton of
doesn't
money.
help, Kurt.
Well, just recognize that it's very difficult work. You can only do it for so many years. And if you're married, you might not be after you work in the field for a few years. It takes a big toll on families and relationships. But it can be very rewarding. You develop very close relationships with people that you go into the field with. Sort of like almost like going to war, except we're not getting shot at. But it's very similar. You're traveling. The work you're doing can be kind of hazardous at times. It's very hard work, long hours. So you develop very close personal bonds with people. Um, Other than that, I would say don't trust lawyers. Yeah, don't trust lawyers
Okay, I'll take that advice.
and politicians.
Roger that.
Oh,
Kurt,
because they're all lawyers.
yeah, right. Hey, Kurt, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing the
Okay.
stories. I really am looking forward to reading the book. And actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to come by. I'm going to see you and get a signed copy for myself. Just saying,
When are you coming by?
whenever I can. All I know is
Okay.
you're in Alexandria, Virginia, which helps me
That's
because
right.
I used to be there. I lived there for 2 years, right off Telegraph Road. So
Okay,
I know that area.
I'm I'm about 1 mile north of George Washington's estate.
Oh, I know right where you're at. So I'll come by.
All right.
We'll have a beer together, and I get my book signed. Huh?
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, thank you again, Kurt. I appreciate it, and I'll catch you soon.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here.
Go!
Now it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at The Real Rescue. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real Rescue Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
SpectroLab. SpectroLab, a pioneer and world-leading supplier of high-intensity searchlights for all para-public operations. Visit www.spectrolab.com to learn more about our third-generation Night Sun series high-intensity searchlight. When reliability and performance is critical to your mission, count on SpectroLab Night Sun searchlights. Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft. As a fully integrated system or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station, the PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
And
Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory, globally 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
all right, we are about to release the hounds. Now Rotor is hiding under here at the moment from Chase, which is kind of funny, but we're gonna head to the beach. So are you ready, dogs? You ready? Let's go. Go to the beach. Game on. He's like, come on, let's go to the beach. Let's go. Oh no, they're not ready yet. Oh, here comes Chase. Come on, Rotor. You gotta go. Let's go. Let's hit the beach. Let's go. Here he comes. He's coming. Come on. Game on. Ready? And right down the path and into the water. Let's go.